Thank you so much, Antonella. It's so lovely to actually connect with you in this lockdown. Can you believe we are on day 75? Yeah, I certainly can't. We started this as a 21-day journey, and here we are. So as a form of introduction, Antonella has mentioned, my name is Fortune Gamanya, and I head up the human capital practice at Deloitte Consulting here in the Western Cape. And I thought that I would spend some time today talking to you about the post-COVID workforce recovery. So definitely the lens that I'm bringing to today's conversation is one of human capital. So I would like to, so you will see that my slide gets sticky at times, so I will often just maybe go out a bit and then just re-present again so that they can advance. But really what I would like to share with you this morning is our stance on COVID-19, what organizations have had to do ever since the lockdown was announced in their respective countries, but then to talk about the stage that we currently find ourselves in as organizations. And then, of course, I will share with you the highlights of what we are calling the recovery phase. So I'm going to start by sharing some data that I got from a report that was put together by the International Labour Organization. And really what it says is that there are 3.1 billion people who are employed globally. And of those 3.1 billion people, 2.6 billion are in some lockdown in their country of residence. So if that is not what would have been perceived as a crisis at the beginning of the year, I don't know what is. Because I'm sure most of you on the call as risk experts, you definitely became the MVP, particularly here in South Africa in mid-March, when the president said, fellow South Africans, I'm going to ask you to endure 3 weeks of lockdown. You definitely became the most important person because we were counting on you to pull out that critical business continuity plan. So we were all in a frenzy. And I put this context forward because I want to present what we are calling our stance on COVID. So we believe that as a result of this lockdown, organizations have had to get into a period of just really responding and making sure that they continue with their operations and ensure that their people continue to deliver value for their consumers. And of course, what this has done is it has definitely showed us who are the essential workers. So our first aspect is we look at a respond part of our response, which is how an organization deals with the present situation and really manages continuity. So it was really just a crisis process, really looking at how many people have laptops, stuff as basic as that. So I remember speaking to a CEO of a client company, and he was saying, you know, we really need our call center to continue to be up and running. But can I tell you that we need 3,000 laptops for us to do that? So those are the most basic things that we found with keeping business leaders awake at night. How do they ensure continuity of their business operations? And so the question around do we preserve lives or livelihoods obviously came to the fore. So what we started doing is once we realized that we had maintained some degree of continuity in our businesses, we then moved into what we call the recover phase. So what we are also cognizant of is because of the capacity to go through change and be resilient in organizations. Not all organizations have moved over to the recover phase. Some organizations will still find themselves in the respond phase, but most organizations we are finding are now in the recover phase. Really, this is about starting to reimagine how your new normal is going to look like. And so to really then reflect on what has happened, what you've learned, and so how are you going to emerge on the other side? I mean, I'm sure you have seen, I'm an avid Estee Lauder products user, but what we realized is we found organizations like Estee Lauder whose key or core business is beauty products. They then shifted their production lines to start making sanitizers. And I know I've got a client who is also in the alcohol business, but guess what we needed for our sanitizers to work? A very high alcohol content. So what they did is they had to quickly rethink how can they become relevant and ensure that they continue to make their operations continue to run. So they started making sanitizers. Not only that, but they were really contributing to a crisis that we were collectively experiencing. And so the last phase is the phase where we believe is you have now settled into your new normal. So it is also important that here I do state that when we've engaged with our clients, we have actually realized that the recover phase will take a minimum of 18 to 24 months, because it's really about refocusing your business, reprioritizing some of your strategic objectives based on the setback that your organization has experienced. So really the Thrive is about how an organization prepares for and shapes the new normal. So what I've got on there are some of the questions that organizations can ask themselves. So what I will do as well is I will share our recovery workbook, which will cover most of this content with Antonella so that it can be shared with everyone. And in that recovery workbook, you will find the questions that are on the right side of the slide. So for example, one of the things that we talk about from a workforce perspective is, will the organization be hiring and expanding or contracting? Because we believe that with the emergence of this recovery phase, or recovering from the setback that's been created by the pandemic, organizations will have to rethink how their workforce is structured or composed. And one of the things that we found is that actually 35% of the workforce is going to want to continue to work remotely. So as a result, what does that mean for the real estate that organizations already have? What does that mean about the workplace and how you've set up the workplace? I mean, obviously what we've seen is all of a sudden, the real estate that we had, if we had to have 100% return rate to the workplace, the real estate that we had will actually not be enough for everyone. So how then does that impact your planning? So I thought that I would put up that context so that I can then talk about what are those things that we are asking organizations. And I think the beauty of this, we are not only asking organizations to look at, is that ourselves as an organization, we are finding ourselves in the same boat. So what I will share with you is what we are calling a recovery workbook. We are calling it a workbook because it's an emergent living document that we believe that as we share it with you, you can also help us improve it, because we have not been in the post-COVID era. But what we do have the privilege of is having presence all around the globe. And we are taking lessons from those practices that are in geographies that have gone through this and are really seeing themselves on the further continuum of the recovery phase. So what are those 5 critical actions? The 5 critical actions is, like I said, when we were responding, so from a South African context, in the middle of March, what we were looking at was really how do we survive? How do we stay afloat? So there was never a moment for organizations to think of what could be the lessons that we are learning here. So we often used to hear, we need to go on a digital transformation, or we need to really rethink our strategy and talk about including all these technologies in the way we work. But we were not doing it because if people had asked us to work remotely, we would have excuses up to the end of the earth of why it could not happen. But when 75 days ago, the day came and we needed to go on lockdown, everyone had the capability of working remotely. And I think, with the exception of a few people, but I think most knowledge workers were able to actually continue with their work. So really, the first R, so we talk about the 5 R's in the recovery phase. And that first R is to really look at reflecting and extracting lessons from what we have experienced over the 75 days. I remember speaking to one of my clients and one of the gentlemen saying, the number of decisions that we've made in the past few weeks are more than the number of decisions we have made in the past 2 years. So that in itself says that we constrain ourselves, or rather we constrained ourselves in the past normal because we created a belief that some things could not be done because we had created some script, and that script had to be the script. So I think leaders have to get into a period of reflecting so that they think about what has worked, what have they learned, and what has been missed in the response. So what could we do differently now that we are in the recovery phase? The next R is about recommitting. So I think if you look at our past normal, yes, we cared about the well-being of our people, but I think COVID has really heightened the responsibility of the employer to care about the well-being of their people, whether from a physical, physiological, and financial, because what we started seeing is organizations started pulling different triggers for them to stay afloat, and really employees had to also contribute to this because it is all about us. And I'm going to quote something that Alex said at the end of his presentation, that really what this crisis has done, it has brought the world together. And I think for employers, depending on how they would have managed this, I think it would have actually, employers would have built a greater sense of loyalty in their people as a result of how they handled this. And so then, because of those triggers that you had to pull to ensure that organizations are staying afloat, the next R that we talk about is this R of re-engaging. So redeploy workforce and maximize the workforce contribution and potential while preparing the workforce with the skills and capabilities for the return. So we had to rethink the kinds of training, the kinds of capability building that we do for our people when we were told that, level 4, I think it was, it must have been the 1st of June was level 3. But we heard, the president announced that only 30% of people will be coming back to work. So how do we ensure that we equitably share the work? Or for those that will not be able to, how do we rethink that workforce strategy that I spoke about at the beginning? And then the next R is really about rethinking. So when we talk about the future of work, we talk about 3 aspects. We talk about the work that will be delivered, i.e. the way that an organization delivers value. So we have to think about how that will change. A simple example is if you've got people on a production line and they were standing very close to each other, you then have to rethink how that value will be delivered now that you're going to reconfigure the workplace. The next is the workforce. So the workforce, now you have to bring back 30% of your people. From a contractual basis, what does it mean for everyone else? Or if you want to give work to everyone, how then do you structure that? So really what we've seen is a process of being catapulted to the future of work without us not willingly going there. And the last one is reboot. So what we knew as HR policies before COVID would have to change because the workforce that we are engaging now looks different. The way the work is being delivered now looks different. The workplace now looks different. So what I would like to leave you with today is the workbook that I spoke about, and that it is a living document. And so what we also try and do is customize it for every industry. But I will take you through a series of questions, and what I would like to do is to also maybe demonstrate one or two questions so that you know how to use it. Not only does it give you an insight into what you are doing in terms of work, workforce, and workplace, but what it will do is it will give you some degree of diagnosis of where you are on the journey to responding to COVID, whether you're in the respond phase and the recover. And if you're in the thrive phase, please call me so that I can come and learn from you how you catapulted yourself to the thrive phase. And so I just want to get a check. Antonella, how much more time do I have? Because I'd like to demonstrate the workbook.
Roxanne, come in, please.
Fortune, you have about 10 minutes left.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So what I would like to do is you will see what you have in front of you is a series of questions. So we believe that on this journey, you have to think of those three aspects that I spoke about. And here is just a sample of some of the questions that we give you to just explore as an organization. So first, under the work, we talk about the command center. So one of the key things that became apparent when level 4 was announced was how do we mobilize our people so that people firstly know where to go when they come in, ensure that they adhere to the social distancing rules and to all of the health rules that have been dictated by the government. So we then needed to quickly think of platforms, but not only platforms that are selective in terms of demographics, but platforms that can be accessed by all. So we've got a command center. So a command center is where we distribute information and ensure people have got their certificates, they've got their travel certificates, so they can travel, they can move from point A to point B to get to the office. So the command center, what we do is we have what we call a digital workforce engagement. And really what it does is it gives people information and it's reverse charged. So your employees don't have to actually pay for anything when they access information on that digital workforce engagement platform, whether they are using Mobi or they are using a USSD enabled platform or phone. So really it is about, the command center is about how do you move information from the employer to your employees so that they've got all the instructions that they need to ensure that yourselves as the employer and your employees are not caught on the wrong side of the health and safety regulations for COVID. The next one is work design. I spoke about this idea that the way that we deliver value is going to change. So we quickly had to think of how work is designed, and what capabilities are most valued when work is shifted to virtual. And I think I passed a comment earlier that we quickly learned who are the essential people in all of this when we went on to lockdown. And then the digitization is what must be digitized and how, so that we still ensure that people have access to all the documentation that they need for them to work. And then what processes and practices are anchoring our employees to the workplace. So what we found is a lot of IT departments who had very stringent rules. So, if you're not in the office, you're not able to perform some sort of function because you are not on the network. Well, this time around, you cannot be on the network. So we've seen those teams actually go beyond and, really just excel in thinking creatively about ensuring that we continue to access all of the documents that we need. What this has also caused is that we develop new ways of work. So when we talk about new ways of work, we talk about the different behaviors that are required for working remotely. So what we talk about are the different moments of truth that are present when we are working remotely. The first is when I work on my own. The next is when we collaborate. For leaders, it's when you coach. And for teams is when we present. So what we've found is there has to be platforms and tools that enable people across these moments of truth. So what are those platforms? So for example, Teams is a platform that I think we have used, most of us. Zoom, we've all used, I'm sure most of us have used Zoom. So it's a platform, but while you're on the platform, there are other tools that you have to tap into so that you can almost like replicate the physical experience that you would experience in a room, like Antonella and Roxanne have been doing here. So instead of asking questions or putting up your hand, you're able to actually type your questions in the chat box. So those are some of the questions that you might want to ask from a work perspective. From a workforce perspective, I keep talking about this idea around alternative labor strategies. Last year, we started the conversation around the alternative workforce. Are we going to see the gig economy emerge, i.e. having a risk officer who actually services multiple organizations because they don't need to be work for just that one organization, but what they've seen is they are able to actually service multiple organizations. And are we going to see an ecosystem of employment? So those are some of the things that we are asking organizations to think about. And then the people strategy, really, it goes back to that 30% that I spoke about. So how are we going to plan for our people? Are we going to keep 30%? Are we going to keep 100% and then rotate them? How will that look like, and what will work for your organization? And so what we've found in terms of leadership they've had to be very resilient, but also what we found is they've had to be really authentic. What this has done, it has taken all of us into each other's homes. So we have seen that even with this distancing, we have become more human. So how do we translate that when we go back to the office, not to the normal, the office? How do we take that humanity that we have created through this virtual back into the workplace? And then in terms of workplace, it's really thinking about the workspaces, the health and safety. So what I would like to do is to quickly show you how I'm going to stop sharing this. I'm going to stop sharing this so that I can share the workbook. Roxanne, please confirm if you can see the workbook, if you can see my screen.
I can see your screen, Fortune.
Okay, great. So what you will see, so here I'm on page 9, but maybe what I can do is I can just quickly show you how the workbook looks like. So, and Antonella, so I will give this to Antonella and Roxanne, and they can send it to you. So the contents are really looking at that workforce, workplace, the respond, recover, thrive, which are the 3 phases of responding to the pandemic. It will take you through the 5 R's that I took you through, and then it will give you the breakdown of what we focus on under workforce, workplace. And so what you can do is you can facilitate a conversation with your teams to look at, in terms of the command center, if you answer these questions and look at your plan, you can then determine where you are. So the page that I have open here in front of you is the page that is, so you can see that it is an editable. Let me just do that. You can see that it's an editable document. So you can see here I've opened under work design. So here the question, or rather the comment, is as organizations move from respond to thrive, there will be a need and opportunity to examine how work is designed, structures are organized, and how teams collaborate. So I will just do a quick demonstration so you will see nature of work. So for example, here we can look at nature of work. Have we adequately challenged the outcomes we want to achieve through our work? If so, how is this further changing the nature of work? So for example, we can talk about so the design of the workplace. So you can edit, and you can think of, you can edit, and you can actually come up with plans with your teams, and you can do it on a platform like we are doing now. So that's what I wanted to demonstrate for you. But I'm going to share this with Antonella and Roxanne so that you can use it if you need to.
I've got a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Can I go ahead and pose them to you?
Yes, please.
Excellent. So the first one is from Antonella de Cunha. She wants to know, COVID consequence, how will employees be measured and what changes in metrics to follow organizational change?
So how will employees be measured and what changes in metrics?
Yes, given all of these organizational changes, do you foresee?
Yes, absolutely. So I think that's a great question because it speaks directly to what I was saying, that the way work is going to be done is going to change. So we have to challenge ourselves as organizations. If we were delivering work in a particular process and we have learned from this process that actually we could have done this differently, then we have to measure our people using that basis rather than the basis that we used previously. What have we learned throughout this process of working remotely? And so how then do we measure our people from that perspective?
Thank you. Interesting question from Zahir Ali.
Yeah.
He says the lockdown scenario has diminished some of the justifications companies may have put forth for not recruiting persons with disabilities. From a talent strategy perspective, how do you propose we start the conversation on job creation and inclusivity for persons with disabilities?
So you said Zahir?
Zahir.
Yeah. So Zahir, so firstly, I don't even think the inclusion that we needed to practice in this time of lockdown, we can even go as further as thinking disabled people. The distance required us to actually, as leaders, exercise inclusion even for those able-bodied people, because what we started seeing was the rise of mental issues because of this distancing. So to even start talking about disabled people, I feel like we would have lost the plot. We have to actually talk about all human beings, because right now this has brought us together, abled or disabled. This has proven that anyone can do the job from anywhere. So I think inclusion becomes an easier conversation for us to have, which is something that needed to happen a long time ago already. So you asked, how do we start? Now, just start, have the conversation. So what I can do is also share, I also head up the D&I practice at Deloitte. I can also share some thought leadership pieces with Antonella, if that will help you, around what are those 6 signature traits for inclusive leaders, so that you can facilitate the conversation in your organizations around leaders exercising acts of inclusion. Zahir, I hope that answers you.
Thank you. Thanks, Fortune. Question from Karabo. How much of a priority is cybersecurity now?
Listen, Karabo, I don't know if you have experienced this, but what we started seeing was a heightened increase around phishing emails now with COVID, which then says, without a doubt, organizations have to prioritize cybersecurity. Why? Because those things that I spoke about that you couldn't do if you were not on the network, now IT had to enable you to do when you were not on the network. So cybersecurity definitely then becomes elevated. So yes, absolutely. I hope that answers you, Karabo.
Karabo is following up with another question in as far as King goes. By the way, let me first say, lots of respect for the presentation and also lots of praise for sharing that tool with the participants. The whole chat box is full of those. It's always worthwhile when you listen to somebody and there's a tool or two to be used. So back to my question. Also, how will compliance with the King report work? How much do you think this will change with regard to AGMs, annual general meetings?
Okay, so firstly, the most basic is that AGMs are now going to be virtual. So those of you who couldn't attend AGMs for the organizations that you hold shares in, now you can. And then and then in terms of the King Code, you know, when we talk about the policies or frameworks that we hold sacrosanct, I always talk about how those policies should also follow the evolving of the world. And so I'm talking about King Code, but I'm going to use the analogy of cryptocurrency and how central banks have been pushed to think differently about our mode of payment, because we heard about this thing called Bitcoin, but everyone was wondering what this Bitcoin is. Cryptocurrency, does it work? Can I buy with it? Like, what if I'm throwing my money away? And so central banks started thinking about how can they make this mainstream, because guess what? What technology has done, it has placed power in the individual. So the individual now has power to push and shape policy. So I'm using this example because I'm sure most of us have experienced some sort of, you know, cryptocurrency. But from a King Code perspective, I think we have to think about how can it evolve so that organizations are able to deliver on their mandate given the context that we find ourselves in. Karabo, I hope I've answered you.
So, Fortune, we've got 2
Yes.
minutes left in our session.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. With this, please just keep an eye on the chat box. If there are any questions coming through still, if you wouldn't mind just typing in a quick response or maybe a contact detail. Appreciate
Okay.
that.